It was seen by many as a done deal. Paul Kagame returned as Rwanda's president in a landslide win. He had two challenges, but did the people dare vote for them? And has the West turned a blind eye to a leader accused of creating a climate of fear? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. It's a result that comes as a surprise to almost no one. Paul Kagame will be president of Rwanda for another 7 years. His leadership over the past 17 years has been credited for bringing stability and economic development after the horrors of the 1994 genocide. But Kagame has been criticized for abusing civil liberties and suppressing his opponents. Malcolm Webb reports from Kigali.
President Paul Kagame voted at a polling station in Rwanda's capital, Kigali. He's been in office since 2000. Constitutional changes in 2015 allowed him to run again this time. Rights groups say there isn't much political freedom. But Frank Habineza of the opposition Green Party was able to run for the first time. His deputy was killed before the last election in 2010. This time he says he was harassed, but then things improved.
Administrative problems where some local leaders were blocking us, blocking people from coming to our campaign. That was in Rusizi, Nyamasheke, and then in Nyagatare, where the local leaders sent us to a graveyard where we had to suspend our campaign, and in Kirehe, where they sent school children to disappear us and throw stones at us. But afterwards, when the Minister of Government intervened, everything went well, so we finished well.
Voters formed orderly queues at polling stations, often waiting in silence. People here vote early. They've been queuing here since sunrise. Turnouts are also usually very high. The ruling RPF party says that reflects its popularity. But opposition, of which there's little here, says people don't have much choice. It reflects a climate of fear and oppression. In the capital, some queued to the bouncy melodies of a song from the Electoral Commission. The lyrics encourage people to come and vote. A message lost on activist Diane Rigara, who says the election's pointless. She says her application to run was wrongly rejected by the Electoral Commission and that people vote knowing they can be arrested or killed for not obeying the ruling party, something it denies.
Rwandan people fear the president. There's a fear of the ruling party, the RPF. So they, out of fear, they act like they support the president and his party.
As the results came in, the Electoral Commission reported Kagame winning almost all of the vote. He came to speak to his supporters.
This election was criticized so much due to me continuing to be your leader, especially by people from outside the country, because they oppose the will of Rwandans. But Rwandans have shown that this election was not manipulated by anyone, but was held according to their own will.
The ruling party supporters celebrated the results, which were exactly as expected. Malcolm Webb, Aljazeera, Kigali, Rwanda.
Well, let's bring in our guest now. Joining us from Kigali is TK Gatete, a senior researcher at the Institute for Policy and Research in Rwanda and a government supporter. In London, we have Justin Bahunga, a member of the unregistered FDU Inkingi opposition party. And in Washington, D.C., Ni Akwete, executive director of the African Immigrant Caucus. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Justin Bahunga. Not a huge surprise, this result, is it? A good thing or a bad thing for Rwanda?
It's a bad day for Rwanda.
Tell us why.
Because it has made Rwandans a laughing stock of the world. Such results as I hear them, 99%, are only possible in North Korea and in Iraq under Saddam. And of course, what we have been seeing is a situation where the key political players are either in jail in exile or dead, and where the people who are controlling the system are exactly the same people we are competing with. And I compare to a football match where you would have one of the teams deciding which team is going to play with and set the rules of the game and even appoints officials. And then at the end of it, decides that he has won. Not only officials, but also deciding which players are going to play. I give an example of the Green Party, where the charismatic leader, the deputy president of the party, Luis Sereka, was beheaded in 2010. And of course, they have got another weaker candidate, which have been who allows to compete. But also, when you rule out anyone who can actually compete with you more seriously. And you have seen the case of Diane Rwigara and another independent candidate called Mwenedata.
But when you go back,
unfortunately, and with the more...
Sure, sorry, if I could just jump in for a moment. When you go back to the state Rwanda was in more than 20 years ago, after that terrible genocide of 1994, Mr. Kagame's ruling party, the RPF, had taken power. And by all accounts, the economy is growing at least 7% a year. Poverty levels have fallen under his rule. The country's opened its first maize flour factory, improved the road network, established a national airline. There are plans to boost the country's status as a business hub. I mean, these are all things to celebrate, aren't they?
They are. And by the way, Rwanda, its history is that the issue has not been economic development. It has been the issue of violation of human rights. If you look at the World Bank report on 1989, it was saying that actually Rwanda is one of the most well-managed economies in Africa, where there is no corruption, where there is, unlike other countries, where there is a little disparities between the rural and the urban areas. And whereas today, you have the disparities between the rich and the poor has doubled. And they are saying, these are the figures of African Development Bank, that if you look at what they call economic growth, that although Human Development Index is 0.51%, almost doubled, but because of these inequalities, it's the same level as 1985. So the whole point is that all this growth has profited a small number within the RPF who are close to the power or to the army.
TK Kadete, if I could turn to you then. I mean, as we've been saying, this is a result that's not a huge surprise to anyone on both sides of the political divide. But 98%, does that sound like a credible result? Is that an indication of a healthy democracy when one candidate wins 98% of the vote?
It's not credible. It's not credible or incredible. It is what it is. And in fact, it was predictable, because if you look at the referendum, the figures, the amount of people who petitioned for the constitution to change so that they can have President Kagame run again, they had the same amount, the same figures. You must understand the situation in Rwanda and the position of President Kagame to understand where these figures come from. Jacques Chirac was elected with 83% the other day because he was running against Jean-Marie Le Pen. Did that sound credible to you? It wasn't credible or incredible. It was just the context in which they were running at the time. So that's how you look at elections.
Nia Kwete, how should the international community look at these results?
You know, that is a depressing question for me to answer. My answer is depressing because President Kagame took power in 1994. The international community has been fully aware of everything that has gone on in his inner circle, in the country, in the region. He has invaded, fostered invasion 3 times. He has sponsored militias. He has plundered the Congo. When we talk about the wealth in Rwanda, we must understand where the wealth is coming from. He has abused human rights. The United States Senate had hearings, and they are allies of the U.S. of President Kagame. The U.S. Senate said that Rwanda sends people to go and kill its critics in other countries. So I hear your question, and it would be good if the international community was very skeptical about the results. By the way, the recent elections in France, Jacques Chirac was not running. It was Mr. Macron. But France has an opposition. Nobody gets killed for wanting to run for office in France. So we must not have false equivalence. The point is that I am very disappointed with the international community, especially the Western democracies, because they are democratic. They say they value democracy. They criticize several African countries, which is correct. But when it comes to Rwanda, for close to 30 years, they have given Mr. Kagame a pass, and he has committed any number of crimes that a state can commit, from invasions to all kinds of things. So I am disappointed in the international community, and I don't expect them to dismiss the results as they should, but they ought not to believe it, because Rwandan voters are intimidated.
Justin Buhunga, I want to ask you about, we talked earlier there about the genocide of 1994 in Rwanda and the ethnic divisions. How do you assess the state of the ethnic relations in Rwanda at this point? And has the Kagame government done anything to address that?
Actually, there is more ethnic divisions than ever before, because when the invasion took place in 1990, there was more problems along regional lines rather than ethnic lines. But now today, because of economic and the political exclusion of the biggest group in Rwanda, the Hutu, the issue of national reconciliation has gone down the drain. But of course, the policy of there is no ethnic groups had been used as smoke screen to hide disparities. But if you look at the army, 99% probably is one ethnic group. The economy is controlled probably 80% by one ethnic group, and including the ruling party, which actually monopolizes the business, and that those who are not ready to work with the government have their buildings destroyed. The case of Rwigara family, the case of Rwandan Tower Hotel, and therefore, we cannot actually speak of reconciliation when one group monopolizes power. And actually, there was a study by the UCLA University, in which participated about 1,000 actual experts, who said that Rwanda is the most excluded country after Syria and Eritrea, and warning that actually when you have a situation where 80% of the population excluded, then we actually have a civil war. And thirdly, and it's about the memory. I've got a country now where the regime uses a national tragedy, a national grief, to criticize or to get rid of opponents. That's, I mean the tragedy of genocide, which actually no one would ever, under any circumstance, justify it. But using it to crush the opposition, that's the worst thing that can happen. I can give an example. I've lost people killed by the RPF or by the militia. But I feel bad when someone uses that tragedy to crush dissent and to get rid of anybody who criticizes the government. So, in other words, the issue of national reconciliation is not there. It's just something that is chanted by the government, but which is not really available, which is to the people of Rwanda.
Nia Kwete, just coming back to what we were talking earlier about in terms of how the international community has responded to this, and you were making the point there that they've largely turned a blind eye to the reports of abuses of human rights in Rwanda. Why is there this kind of selective approach from leaders in the West to certain African leaders, where, in many cases, like, for example, in Zimbabwe with Mugabe, they have condemned him at every turn, but with leaders like Kagame, they haven't done that. Why is that? Just explain that to us.
I think that is a great question. And to underline the contrast that you say, the Economist of London, which is a very good newspaper, but it is not leftist and it is not socialist, it wrote that there is more political space in Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe than in Paul Kagame's Rwanda. So we need to understand that. And yes, the Western countries, the international community, they turn a blind eye to Mr. Kagame's depredations. I think, they give some reasons. Frankly, those reasons don't hold much water for me, but I'll tell you what they are. Number one, they say that he has brought stability to Rwanda. But as my brother, I believe Justin is his name, in London pointed out, the RPF, Mr. Kagame's army, invaded Rwanda in 1990. That started the war that led to the genocide. The role that military also played during the genocide has to be looked at. Some have raised questions. So it is a stretch to say that he brought peace. But at the end of the genocide, he did. Secondly, they claim that there is no corruption in his regime, but former allies of his have pointed out that there is corruption, that the wealth is in a few hands who are government-related and government officials. And thirdly, they say that, he has made economic progress, that there's development in the country. But I would like to point out that there have always been questions as to how much really that is. Some people have been, including me, have been suspicious for a long time. But forget about us. There are people who used to work with the regime, experts, who have now come out and said that the books are being cooked. For instance, what you define as poverty has been redefined. There are also stories that maternal deaths, women who die giving birth to children, as well as children who die, those numbers are deliberately undercounted to make the numbers look good. So the Western countries give this excuse that, well, he's brought stability, he's the kind of leader we would like to see in Africa. But I'm saying that when you shine a light on those excuses, it makes no sense. There's one area, though, where maybe that is the real reason. You contrasted Mr. Kagame with Mr. Mugabe. The point is that Mr. Mugabe argues back, pushes back, criticizes the West. From what I see in Washington, they like people who may be heavy-handed authoritarians, but they do what they are told. They don't like those who argue with them and question positions that the West takes. So it comes down to, are you doing what we want, or are you doing something else? Even if that something else is what your own people want. All
right. TK Gatete, I know you want to respond to some of that, and I also want to ask you about a report that was put out by the group Reporters Without Borders, which identifies President Kagame as a predator who attacks press freedom in Rwanda, citing the fact that in the last 2 decades, 8 journalists have been killed or have gone missing, 11 have been given long jail terms, and 33 have been forced to flee Rwanda. What does that tell us about the climate in Rwanda at the moment?
Right, so those have been very long speeches for both of you, but let me start with your colleague first. Every one of the things that my colleague was saying, that they say this, they say that, it's not they. These are figures from the World Bank, from the United Nations, from the Africa Development Bank, from the IMF. We have to have a basis of conversation. When we say poverty has reduced, when you say Rwanda achieved the highest human development, it's not they, it's actually the United Nations, it's the MDG people who work for the UN, it's the World Bank. When they speak of maternal mortality, it's the World Health Organization. When they speak of corruption, it is Transparency International. So when my colleague says they tell us, there's no they. These are institutions that are international. Because if I would say something and then you'd say something back, it's my word against yours. Which is why we have internationally recognized United Nations institutions that conduct these types of studies. Now, my colleague can advise them on how to change the methodology of gathering this information, and that is fine. But when he says they tell us, it's very important to clarify that any of the figures in which Rwanda is at the highest positions are not figures published by the government of Rwanda. It's by internationally recognized institutions. Right. When we talk about corruption, it's Transparency International, and so on. So there's no they, excuse me, that's one. Second point my colleague talks about, it's about the genocide. Now, same thing, they said the role of the genocide. The ICTR, the International Tribunal for Rwanda, again, clarified what the genocide was, who were the perpetrators of the genocide. It's clear there is a judgment of an international court, a UN court. So there's no they in this conversation. There's no elephant in the room. There is internationally recognized institutions that come to Rwanda and assess progress, assess poverty levels, assess human development, access.
Okay, you made your point on that, but let me get to another international.
No, that's number one.
Okay, let me get to another international institution, yes, if I may, because our time is limited. My original question: Reporters Without Borders, yes, which is an organization, yes, that defends the rights of journalists around the world. They say that under this regime, the government has attacked press freedom. They say that 8 journalists have been killed over the last 2 decades or have gone missing. 11 have gone to jail and 33 have been forced to flee Rwanda. What's your response to that?
Right. So, one, Reporters Without Borders, how they define freedom. Do you know, Rwanda, the highest score Rwanda has scored on Reporters Without Freedom Index was in 1992 and 93, just before the genocide. In fact, for Reporters Without Borders standards, RTLM, which was ruled by the ICTR as media of hate, is an indicator of press freedom. So Reporters Without Borders definition of freedom, if Rwanda, you see, all these countries like Central African Republic and Burundi, these are countries that have always scored higher than Rwanda on Reporters Without Freedom Index just before they went bust.
Right. So my question is, I mean, are you disputing these figures? Are you saying that these figures are all made up? Are you saying that 8 journalists were not killed?
I'm not disputing the figures. I'm just giving you facts. 8 journalists were not killed. But you see, if I told you 8 journalists were not killed, you'll say, yeah, but Reporters Without Borders.
So you're saying Reporters with Borders are lying? They're just making this stuff up.
But listen, it's not the first time. It's not the second time. It's not the third time. They probably, first of all, you have to look, who do they define as journalists? Who died? What condition they died in? And if you go into all these things, you'll find that half the people had a natural death, others didn't exist, they make them up, others were not even journalists, and so on. But I'm not going into that type of reporting. Right. I'm just pointing out, and this you can verify, that every one of these countries that are in conflict in this region are countries that score much higher than Rwanda on Reporters Without Borders Index.
We're going to have to leave it there.
I don't know if that's a bona fide index.
We are unfortunately out of time. We're going to have to leave it there.
Fuel conflict.
Thank you to all 3 of you, TK Gatete, Justin Bahunga, and Ni Akwete. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you as well for watching. Remember, you can see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.